When I was a freshman in college in October of 2018, a guy that I'll call Ron Jones stalked me. I met Ron through one of our mutual friends, Chris, because they were in a school club together. When I met Ron, I thought he was kind of strange, but he was nice and he seemed interesting. He claimed to be Slavic and had an accent to back that up. I just thought that he might seem weird because of cultural differences. I go to school in a rural, southern area, and I figured the culture shock between here and wherever he was originally from was a lot to handle. Anyway, we traded numbers and texted infrequently for a couple of weeks. On October 3rd, 2018, a friend of mine and I went to a drag show on our campus. We weren't out super late, but it was dark when the show had ended and we began walking back to our dorm. I had been texting Ron a bit during the night because he was unable to get a ticket to the show, and he wanted to know how it was. At some point in the conversation, I mentioned that I wanted to go grab some orange juice on my way back to my dorm. I don't know why I mentioned that to him. I think I was just trying to make conversation. My friend and I stopped in the convenience store near our building so I could get said orange juice, and Ron was already there. He said something about buying the juice for me, and I thanked him but declined. He got kind of mad and he started to walk away, which was odd to me, but I let it go. My friend and I walked out of the store and saw that he was standing outside. Our dorm was actually right across from the building that the convenience store was in, so he saw us enter the building. My friend and I parted ways and I walked up to my room, which was on the second floor of the building facing the convenience store. I kick myself for doing this now, but I went to my window, opened it, and yelled down to Ron when I saw that he was still standing there. I apologized for declining his offer to buy the juice for me, because I felt like I had been rude, a guilty conscience, I guess. He stood below my window, started talking to me about random stuff, and at one point he said something that was odd. He was like, "Can I flirt with you? I enjoy doing that." I kind of laughed and said, okay, because I had no clue how to respond to that, and just figured he was a flirtatious person. Stupid, I know, but that's not the dumbest thing that I did. I ended up going outside to sit and talk to Ron for a little bit, because I felt bad for being rude earlier. As if declining someone's offer to buy you something is rude, jeez. While we were outside, he didn't say anything of note, and he was acting pretty normal. It got cold out, so we asked if we could go inside to talk, and I said sure. At this point in the year, I had had several guy friends over to my room just to do work and chat, so I didn't see an issue with it, and things started out pretty normally, but they quickly got scary. Out of nowhere, Ron basically turned into a different person when we were all alone in my room. He stopped blinking. He held eye contact super intensely, and he was laughing in this really low, creepy way. On top of that, his accent disappeared. That's when he told me that he had lied about being Slavic, and that he's native to the state that our college is in. He got increasingly more creepy, and there was nothing that I could do about it because I had a single room my freshman year. At one point, he grabbed me in a hug and wouldn't let go of me until I said, "Let go of me right now," 3 times or so. He told me that he had done a lot of bad things and that if I wanted to put him in jail, he could give me the names of people who have evidence against him. He said that he hates pretty much everybody until they give him a reason not to hate them. He said a lot of weird and nearly sexual stuff to me as well. Like he went on and on about how showering alone isn't fun, and that it's better with another person, and that he would be willing to do that if I wanted to. Keep in mind, this guy has a girlfriend and he acknowledged that. He even said that he would go after me if he weren't dating someone, which freaked me out. He asked if he could sleep in my room and I said no, and I used that to tell him that I was ready for bed and that he needed to leave. As he left, he said, Do you want to know how insecure the locks in your doors really are? He also pulled a few IDs out of his wallet, all with different names. I closed the door on him and looked through the people. He stood there looking at the door for an uncomfortably long time before eventually leaving. After that, he called me multiple times throughout the month, always at weird times. He started appearing everywhere that I was around campus. The friend who had introduced us, Chris, actually started walking everywhere with me because he noticed Ron following me around and lurking around corners when I couldn't see him. Apparently, he was around me a lot more than I realized because Chris began carrying a knife wherever he went places. Ron was everywhere. He would come up to me and put his arm over me and whisper stuff like, "We need to talk," whenever he would see me. For a while, he would lurk outside of my dorm room, and that stopped all of a sudden one day. I later found out that Chris had told my RA about Ron, and that he had been banned from my building. I hadn't done that myself because I thought I was overreacting. I wasn't. I blocked him on my phone and he hasn't contacted me since. He did apologize to me one day on campus last semester when we ran into each other, and I was actually willing to accept it and move on. Until recently. So here I am 2 years later and everything that happened with Ron has come back up again. I found out recently that he has a history of doing this to other women, like an extensive history going back at least 5 years. I met another victim of his who he stalked before coming to my university. She had gone to community college for a bit, and he did this to her while he was also a student there. He followed her to our university after apparently being suspended from the school after 3 incidents that were linked to him. The victim that I met told me something worrying. Ron is currently an RA on our campus, and she was one of his residents. When she told the residential office that Ron had stalked her in the past, they told her that all they could do was have her move dorms, and which she did. They then said that they couldn't do anything to discipline him because the stalking didn't occur at our university. She and I both reported our experiences with him to the residential office, who then tipped off the campus police, who then spoke to the dean of students. The thing is though, when I gave his name to the residential office, they had no idea who I was talking about. He had given me a fake first and last name, and I had to do a lot of searching to find out his real name. I knew that he was sketchy when I saw the 4 separate IDs in his wallet, but I didn't ever think he had given me a fake name when I had met him. After talking to residential living, I talked to the police. When I talked to police, they didn't seem to care about what I had to say. Actually, the officer that I spoke to talked over me while I was explaining the times that he followed me, and said that he had heard all he needed to hear. I spoke to the dean of students, who asked me some clarifying questions about the police report that he had received. The police had mixed up several details of my story with the stories of other victims. Apparently, more people than just myself and the girl that I met have come forward with information about this person. There are even reports that he got physical with 2 separate people before coming to the university. Last week, I saw him on campus. He's still an RA, even though multiple women have spoken to higher-ups about his behavior. If I hear from him, I'm issuing a no-contact order to ensure that he stays away from me. Right now, though, that feels like too much of a hassle because we're all going home for a 2-month break. Yeah, that's kind of it. It's anticlimactic and there's no sense of justice in all of this. But hopefully, this story teaches you all to stay on your toes and not to think you're overreacting when someone is being sketchy. An old friend of mine had a canine search and rescue operation and had several dogs that had different skills. He had dogs that were trained for different things. One to search for human remains, one that was trained to search for living survivors, including through the rubble of accident or disaster sites, and even a little dog that could detect bed bugs. I would sometimes help in the training of the dogs by hiding in the woods or in hard-to-reach places, and I love doing it. It's amazing to see these incredible animals working, and plus I love them. I sat with him a lot when he was out searching in different parts of the country for actual victims. One afternoon, we were walking through the park with a cadaver dog. A beautiful German Shepherd was the face of the company. Not working, but we did have our canine search and rescue attire on when a man had approached. He stopped us to ask if he could pet her, which is not uncommon, and she was super friendly and sweet, so we said of course. And the weird thing is that the moment that he stopped, the dog immediately gave her a signal and laid down right by his feet. My friend and I looked at each other almost in horror, because the dog was signaling that she detected human remains. She was the most experienced of all the dogs and would not have made a mistake. It was clearly her signal. It spooked us both so much that we cut the conversation short and left quickly. To this day, we have no idea what that was about. I should also add that she was trained to detect human remains. She was taught not to alert on animal remains. I still think about that day a lot. Okay, I should start this story by giving a bit of background so that you understand the situation a bit better. I, a 4'9", 16-year-old female at the time, had 2 dogs who were brothers from the same litter. Now, being boxers, they were relatively big and quite protective when they need be. Vince was longer, much taller than his brother, and is usually the kind to sleep through a hurricane if we had one. His brother Maury was shorter but more muscled and stronger. Usually these two were with me 24/7, as my mother used to work a lot and I was usually home alone most of the day, sometimes even until after dark. Now this never really bothered me. I had been left alone at home like this since I was 11. It never struck me that I had a reason to be worried. One day that my mom was working later, I was doing some household chores, feeding the dogs, doing dishes, stuff like that. I continued doing what I always had, a routine of tidying the house that I had done every day for years. As I went to take the trash out of the bin, I started walking towards the door when Maury stepped in front of me. I tried moving around and telling him to get out of the way and sort, but he refused to budge. This was certainly odd, and looking back on it now a few years later, I realized he was probably trying to stop me from walking outside. We continued like this for a few moments, me trying to get past him and him, of course, never moving from his spot. He was quite heavy as a big dog. It was difficult to lift him and even harder to get him away from something. Now in the time that we had been going back and forth with this interaction, Vince stayed happily asleep on his dog bed. I should note that from my kitchen you can see the living room and bathroom. Usually we used the side door from the kitchen to enter or exit the house, since it was attached to the carport. After a couple more minutes, I heard something that I hadn't expected when I made one last desperate attempt to move Maury from his spot. He growled, which wasn't unusual as he had growled plenty in his life. What was unusual was that he growled at me. He had never done that before, not once. But for that reason and that reason alone, I decided not to take the trash out that night. I simply tossed it in another room and left it be. A short time passed, maybe a half hour or so. I had gotten settled into my chair to watch some movie while I waited on my mom to come home. While I was watching the movie, I suddenly heard a quiet knock at the side door. As I mentioned earlier, you can clearly see the living room from the kitchen, so I heard the knock pretty well. It was already after dark, so I figured it was just my mother and she had somehow forgot her keys. I got up, went into the kitchen, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the hook near the door. The keys weren't there. Now to some people that's not a big deal, but to me, it meant that the person knocking at my door was in fact not my mother. My mom is a bit of a routine-obsessed person, so if she actually had forgotten her keys, they would always be on the hook. I took a breath, preparing myself to not just answer the door or, if they didn't leave, to just tell them I wasn't interested in whatever was happening and that they should leave. Thinking about it now, I really wish I hadn't even looked out the window on that door. I wish that I had just sat back down, called my mom, and stayed out of sight. But of course, I walked in front of the door and immediately came face to face with a figure on the other side of the window. Now, it was really dark with just my neighbor's light shining from his porch, so I could only make out a couple things on this guy. He was tall, me having to peer up at him through the window to look at his face. He had long hair that looked like a shadow over his shoulders in the dim light, but the only facial feature that I could really see were his eyes. God, I wish I hadn't seen them. I could see the spark of interest flare in them as he perked up when he saw me. They were wide and staring down at me. He took a step towards my door, stepping on the first of the 2 steps. I heard him say something along the lines of, "My car broke down nearby, could I come in and use your phone?" Immediately, I thought of every bad thing that I had ever heard happening to a teenager home alone, and I tried to compose my nerves. I'm not sure what it was, but something told me not to trust this man, standing on the other side of my door. I shouted back a quick no, and an apology, hoping that he was telling the truth and would just go to the next house over. But he didn't. Instead, he simply said it again, quite a bit louder. I thought for a quick moment that he hadn't heard me, but then again, I now know that he most likely had. So I instead became a bit more confident. "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Go to the next house," I shouted louder. For a moment he paused, as if contemplating what to do, and then he knocked again, louder than the first time that I had heard it. My heart rate increased as I stared at him. When I didn't react, he started to loudly bang against the door. I took a step back, praying to whatever god that he would either leave or my mom would be home early. I was usually a quiet girl, but my mom was a tough redneck with a raptor knife. She could take him. He started to bang on the glass after a moment, my mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. Should I hide? Run? My phone was in the other room and I was scared to take my eyes off the guy. I was sure that he would break through the glass. The banging was vibrating my eardrums, and apparently it was vibrating Maury's too. I saw him creeping up past the doorway, bending his head, teeth bared, and he started to bark loudly. The guy stopped a moment, trying to see into the window at the floor where Maury stood. When he stopped barking, the guy mistakenly tried to jiggle the door handle. Now that's when Vince woke up. I swear to God, for a dog that was dead asleep 5 seconds prior, I had never seen him move that fast, ever. In only 2 seconds, Vince had his paws up on the door, growling like a hound at the devil's side at this man outside my home. The guy jumped, fell back, and bolted it. I heard him say something as he started to run and saw another shadow. My mom came home shortly after I had sprinted across my carport to my neighbor's. We called the police after I had explained what had happened, and my neighbor had dragged his shotgun out before they even got there. He had insisted on looking for the guy. The police had said that somebody tried to pick the lock on my front door, but there was a lot of stuff in front of it and it was really old, so it didn't open anymore. I went to bed that night uneasy and so very thankful that I had 2 dogs who were not only strong and big, but one that was vigilant and one that could practically kill if you let him. A few weeks went by and we hadn't heard from the cops, so eventually I stopped trying to think about it. Another month went by, and although I was a bit scared of being home alone, nothing else seemed to happen. And then we got another visit from the cops. What they told me made my heart sink in my chest, and it still gives me chills to this day. They had caught the guys and realized that they were stalking me. Yes, guys in plural. There were 2 of them that had apparently been stalking me without my knowledge for months. They had several photos of me, words they had written over them, awful things. The police had been fairly adamant that I changed my locks, since they caught 2 guys and there was evidence of a 3rd. We moved shortly after that. I still pass by that house sometimes when I go to visit friends or do stuff around that area. A chill runs down my spine every time. To think that they never caught one of the guys was scary enough. The fact that they tried to break in was worse, not to mention that I hadn't even known they were watching me. I still think about it even now a few years later. I dread what would have happened if my dogs weren't there, and I dread even worse about what they had planned to do if I had opened the door, or they had successfully broken in. I suppose they weren't expecting my dogs since our backyard is fenced, and they mostly stayed indoors since it was so hot where I lived. I thank the universe every day that I had them, especially now. My mom never worked until after dark again after that, which in all honesty was fine with me.